Well, welcome back to another episode of the Buffalo Happy Hour. Mike, what's going on?
Derek, we took I was going to say a little drive, but it wasn't a little drive because we initially hit a rock, postponed, finally made it out to the wonderful Finger Lakes region to sit down with a friend Carl at Hollerhorn Distilling, and there's a lot to discuss. So, how are you, man?
Good. Thanks for coming out.
Absolutely.
Super stoked you guys finally made it.
Yeah, you want to tell everybody where we are?
We are in Naples, New York, right at the south end of Canandaigua Lake. We like to say the heart of the Finger Lakes.
Mm-hmm.
So about 30 minutes south of Canandaigua and about an hour south of Rochester. Yep.
Are you from this area? Is that why you chose it?
I am. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Where'd you, right in Naples?
Grew up in
Nice.
Naples, and then moved away, went to college, and then settled back here. Partly because it's so beautiful and family ties and good people, fresh air.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what made you start getting into the distilling industry?
Well,
I know it's a long story.
The industry is kind of. I don't even know that I'm in the industry yet.
Okay.
No, but I mean distilling. I think I loved brewing for a long time, but really my love was whiskey. So, I think it didn't take long, me brewing beer, and getting into like home brewing to think I could take this the next step, especially getting into single malt whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
It's very similar. You're brewing, and then a single malt is barley yeast water, so you're making a beer, essentially. And then, then I just started kind of studying anywhere I could, trying to work at any kind of shadow people, pick people's brains. Every time I traveled, anywhere I traveled, I was going to distilleries, talking to people, getting to know people, in the industry. And I think it was probably about 15 years ago, my wife and her sister, we all kind of collectively started a little farm-to-table restaurant down here that was going to be a craft cocktail bar. And when we sold that, I think that's really when my mind, both my wife Melissa and I thought, what's the next thing? Let's move this, because it was a little limited space-wise. We were renting the space. So then, we kind of took that and jumped off the ledge big time and said if we're gonna do it, we looked at buildings to rehab, and then we just jumped in full bore and I started really working on my skills, trying to gain as much knowledge as I could about the distilling into things. She has the culinary and artistic. I mean, we're both artists, but she's really got the talent. I mean, this is all of our labels, and I think we just found it was everything. We're makers. It was everything we love to do. So, distilling it's alchemy, but it's also there's physical work involved. It's a lot of cleaning too.
Yeah.
But
that's something we've been hearing a lot. Is a lot of cleaning.
Just like brewing or winemaking. But I love cleaning my shop up every now and again too. Like really deep cleaning. You kind of get into a zen place, and I think there's a lot of artistry and a lot of experimentation, so it kind of fulfilled the artist side of me to try to play with different spirits, different yeast strains, different production methods. It kind of feeds everything. So it's been about 15 years, and I've literally been, I'd save money working, building houses, and then, go to the Hudson Valley and study with somebody, or, I studied with Hubert Germain Raban, a French cognac distiller. We took a trip to Europe, learned from a farm distiller there. So anywhere that I could squeak in, save money and squeak a week-long workshop, go to Kentucky, learn from distillers down there. So that's kind of been a passion for 15 years of just doing it small scale on my own, learning as much as I can, and then this, building this place has really taken it to the next level.
It's crazy because, and we're obviously going to get to your distilling process and what you're making, but I don't want to gloss over the fact that you build houses. So, do you want to talk about that portion and then also your wife's artistic portion too?
Yeah, so we, like I said, we were both artists. I'm a sculptor. I worked and taught at Alfred University School of Art and Design. Both Melissa and I went there. She is a painter, but mixed media artist, and obviously, her drawings are incredible. And so when we moved back here, I think we kind of did this same. We like spaces that feel instantly like they have a soul, and they fill you with energy. It's a big part of when I do any kind of building whether it's a full design build or I'm remodeling something. If I'm designing a space with somebody, it's really important to try to find what their interests are and what their aesthetic is, and then try to pour my creativity and really make the space feel special, because when we're home, we want that to be a place where we're recharging. And that's kind of the idea behind this place, is we want it to instantly feel like it's been here. So with all the old timbers that we salvaged and live edge, anything that's got more of a soft natural edge, we kind of wanted that aesthetic, so that instantly you felt like this has been here, it's lived in. The old furniture, these old like chipped marble tables that we've got, so all that stuff added to that sort of feeling. And that's, I think it's like sculpture. You have this idea and this vision in your head, and then it's about trying to shape it, mold it. And then when the space started to evolve, Melissa's got a great eye for aesthetics, finding old tables or even her idea to do this drawing on the wall, or the way things are hung, the way things are laid out in the space. We have kind of a nice collaboration that way. And she and I did a lot of work together. I'd build houses, she'd come in. I plastered all these walls, but she picks out, there's like 3 different colors of white that she rubs in. They're glazes. So it kind of, there's all these, there's all these little touches that she takes my work and kind of polishes it to the next level, which is kind of fun. And I know that about her, and she knows that about me. So I love it, because I just, I'm the kind of the nuts and bolts guy, and then she comes in and puts the fine shine on everything.
Absolutely.
So you're literally like New York's version of Chip and Joanna.
I don't know who's Chip and Joanna.
Chip and Joanna Gaines on HGTV.
Oh,
The Fixer-Upper people?
gotcha. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
I
think
don't
so.
know them too
They're
well.
very good.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That's hilarious.
That's so cool.
Yeah, we have fun together, even like, with our house, building our place. And it started as an artist studio, a gambrel roof barn. And then we had our first daughter. So it was like, all right, how can we make this little, like, studio apartment above an artist studio into a home? So then it was like add on, move the studio out, move the kitchen down, create more bedrooms, had a second daughter. So it's, it's kind of, things are always evolving, much like kind of when we wandered around here. We're always looking at the property, the space, and how can we make it better? What's the next thing we're going to do to kind of keep people interested and keep us inspired and interested,
Which kind of gives off the whole feel of your distillery being founded on dreams, attracting dreamers. So do you notice your clientele kind of falling in the same suit, where either they'll give recommendations which are welcomed, or is it more or less just everybody's kind of on the same page of what this place could be?
No, I think we get a little bit of the latter, but a lot of the first. Like, so we feel super fortunate. We've got an amazing, I would say, like, our Hollerhorn family, which is sort of the regulars that come, more local people, I'd say within 30-40 minutes of us, that come for events, that come weekly to have food, see what's new on the menu, talk to the the staff that we have too. We're a family in that sense too, So, and there's a ton of artists in this area. That's a big part of what attracted us to come back to Naples. And so I would say we attract a lot of those people that come down because they want to be inspired, whether it's on the food side of things, the cocktails, the view, the conversation, the music. And so I think we get a lot more of the dreamers, this place attracting that kind of artist dreamer, people that have loved the Finger Lakes, are proud of it, share this place because it's kind of their place. They want to bring when their family's visiting from out of town. We get a lot of big families that come and say, hey, this is my family from out in Colorado, and they came up, and I've been dying to take them here. So we get a lot of that. We do get a lot of people that have made suggestions, and some of them, quite honestly, are great. We're certainly all ears. So it's always fun to be on, to hear from somebody kind of on the other side of the service that we're giving. To hear that feedback is super important.
Sure.
And we take it to heart. We have fine-tuned so many rough edges out of the gates that, we love both those kind of people, But I'd say, we get a lot more of the artists, dreamers that share in the space, or give us things that like, Leon Applebaum gave us these beautiful, he's a glass blower. I'm making these beautiful lights because he saw all the horn lights.
Oh,
So
cool.
he blew some glass, some white glass, kind of horn-like.
Sweet.
So we're going to make some lights with this glass. So we get that kind of thing,
Yeah.
which is really cool. People just bringing us horns on that wall. So they show up. Literally, there's sometimes not even a note. They'll leave them on the entryway. So you see all the horn fragments that we
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they just gift them and they'll appear. It's pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So speaking to an artistic, creative, and the horn standpoint, can you tell people about the name Hollerhorn and how
Yeah,
you
yeah.
guys just created it?
Sure. Yeah. So we again, this kind of goes back to I think Melissa and I being artists, and I think for both of us, when we title a sculpture or a painting or a conceptual piece of artwork, the title is always the last, in my mind anyway, the last way to like steer a viewer in a different direction or add another layer to a piece of artwork where you might see a piece of artwork and then read the title and it's going to make you think of something else. It's going to further deepen your understanding of something. So, and we also get hung up on names, being timeless or being dated or being trendy or, so we struggled literally for years. This was like I said, an ongoing dream, and then just started picking words we really loved and kind of keeping a log of those words and what the philosophy of the space, what our passions are, and music for us, it's kind of the little thread that runs through all of this, right? So holler is also a word that's got energy. When you're out and you're seeing live music, sometimes you're inspired to just shout. People get rowdy because it's that energy. We're inspired. So we kind of liked holler because we also love double meanings, and holler is obviously like up in the holler, which Naples, this is kind of local vernacular. Oh, he's up in the holler. There's west. This is Hunt Hollow Road, right? So there's West Hollow, Hunt Hollow. There's a lot of hollows, but that's holler back in the day, right? Up in the holler. And also where the good whiskey was being made was up in the holler a lot of times.
Sure.
And so we liked that word, but we didn't like holla, it was like, that's, not the direction we want to go. And horn, so my father is from Austria. Like I said, he's an Austrian citizen, but moved here when he was 18, 19 years old. And in traveling back to his region of Tyrol in Austria, the horns, so the Matterhorn, the horn is a reference to mountains a lot of times like this in his hometown of Kirchberg and Kitzbühel. In that area, there's the Kitzbühler Horn, which looks down into the town. And so this area really reminded him of home, and that's one of the reasons he settled here. And so I always liked the double meaning of horn, that this is our little horn up here in Naples looking into the valley, kind of much like his hometown.
Sure.
And then I think one day we just started mashing words up, playing with different word combinations, and Hollerhorn seemed to kind of be, and then obviously images started coming out of it. Obviously my wife had done a sketch of this small scale, and out of all of her sketches, this kept resonating. Even this is like 3 years ago. We were kind of conceptualizing things, and 3-4 years ago, and I was like, that drawing just to me seems to resonate and feel right in the space. And when Hollerhorn, we put those two words together, we felt like we invented this instrument, which we talk about as to herald or heed. So a horn can be an instrument that's used to blow, a warning, to blow in celebration and make music, but it's also the old hearing horn, which if you've seen, she did a drawing of an old man they used to have like an old wooden hearing horn or metal hearing horn. And so the idea that it's got the duality, we're here to listen, feedback from people. Also, like the image she drew was of this old man with a hearing horn listening to the field of barley that's up the road. Our first single malt was made from that barley. So it's also, kind of listening to something deeper. It's just as important to listen as it is to put energy and words and sound out into space. So
Sure.
we loved the duality, and that it's an instrument used to herald or heed seemed to be pretty fitting. And also, with everything that goes on here, it seemed like it was a good fit. And
That's awesome.
And it didn't exist, which is nice for trademarking.
Yeah, sure.
True. Very true.
Yeah.
You can skip all that.
Right.
So you briefly discussed, which we can't just not discuss, all the locations that you did workshops in.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Kentucky. You
Yep.
mentioned there was Scotland in there as well.
Yeah.
So going through those countless workshops and enjoying a ton of tastings, your wife also agreed to all of this?
So great
So-
story. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
That's awesome that you picked up on that, because yes, so she was all for it, and I did a bunch of workshops, but I had gone to Scotland with friends and we backpacked. That was always a dream of mine, right? To go to Scotland, to go to some of these iconic distilleries, Lagavulin, Laphroaig, and Islay in particular. But out of all of it, I really wanted to go to Campbelltown, which is it's like the Mull of Kintyre Peninsula. But Campbelltown was the heart of Scotch whiskey many years ago. The most distilleries, over 30 distilleries, probably even more than that. And then they've basically been whittled down to just Springbank and Glen Scotia. But then in this trip, we went to Campbelltown was kind of my bucket list of these 6 friends. They all picked a place. They all picked something they wanted to do. And when I fell in love with Campbelltown, because it's a town and my wife knew how amped I was. When I came back and we really started getting serious about the distillery, she knew I'd been taking small workshops, and she heard me talking about Campbelltown and what an amazing time, and I just must have repeated it 1,000 times. So she surprised me for my birthday maybe 6 years ago, and had contacted Springbank in Campbelltown, and they have a school, and she paid my way to go. So I worked there. Yeah, I was gone for over 2 weeks. She gifted that to me, and that honestly changed my mind and gave me, such a huge focus and obviously a ton of knowledge. So yeah, she's supported. Kentucky. I don't know if you know Wilderness Trail Distillery. So Pat Heist is the head distiller there and part owner. So I've studied with him too. Another mentor, I would say, like Frank McCarty at Springbank. Excuse me, and Pat Heist and Hubert, Jermaine Raban, Brandy, those 3 are kind of I would say, the most intense mentors in the world of spirits and distilling and philosophy, just their energy, their class, their ability to share. I still am in touch with all of them, just message. Sometimes I'll text Pat Heist about questions I have about, because I also buy some of my yeast from him.
Oh, okay.
So that's kind of cool. I'll pick his brain, and he's very generous. I feel like there's a lot of that generosity in the industry. So
Sure.
yeah. So yeah, she's a full supporter, and likewise, I support her dreams. We kind of do the same thing. She wanted to go to Italy years ago, and that was kind of my gift. Is I hustled and saved and surprised her for her birthday.
Oh, nice.
And she kind of chose where in Italy we were going, and obviously food culture there is a huge part of it, and her family history is Italy.
Oh, okay.
So it's kind of cool. We're just country, we're bordering Italy and Austria, which is it's pretty cool. So we've both been able to share in those roots going back.
So, that answers the eventual question, but I basically just wanted to hit and see what the work was like in the capacity for you guys outside of your marriage. Like, did her support help your marriage, and then did you supporting her with everything like this help your marriage? Like, did you guys basically fall back in love throughout this entire process?
We did, yeah. I would say that's the crazy thing is some people, and I've been fortunate to work for great people building houses with couples, and you see some couples really work together as a team, and it brings them closer, and then other couples, it can actually divide them in a way, and you're caught in the middle. And for Melissa and I think we always just have so much respect for one another and what our abilities are and what our strengths are, that this honestly was, it's been stressful, don't get me wrong. There have been so many sleepless nights up at 3 a.m., certainly tears shed. but not in the way that is pulling us apart. You know, it's and our two daughters work here and we're a big part of it and helped build it, and they have so much pride, as do we, in what we were able to do. And I think that, you know, has, I think through it all, the support of each other and how our dreams kind of merge in this place has only made our, we've fallen back in love many, many times into a deep, I would say, marriage can either, and your kids can either bring you to, you know, closer together, I think in the same way that a project like this can, because they're either going to, you're either going to strengthen your bond through that connection and that work, or it's going to tear you apart and you're going to go that way of, you know, maybe resentment or something, which we never have. It's always been a ton of pride and excitement for what our kids or girls are doing, and they've reflected that back at us and have been excited about what we're doing, and we all kind of work to support one another. And it honestly, I feel super lucky, but it's amazing.
That's
I
incredible.
could not be happier.
Yeah,
That's incredible.
beautiful.
Yeah.
So we've talked about you studying in all these different places, and when you come back and you want to create a distillery yourself, as people might know, you can't just come out swinging with a whiskey, because whiskey has to have time to sit in a barrel.
Yep.
You took a different approach because you don't want to make vodka.
Right.
So you decided to make a different type of distilled spirit. I'll let you explain it because I have no idea what I'm talking about. So you want to talk about what you started with?
Totally, yeah. So I think we were kind of talking prior to this a little bit about our property. Our home is about 5 miles south of here. We have a really beautiful 12 acres, a lot of woods, and a lot of sugar maple. And growing up, neighbors tapped all of our sugar maples on our property, and my brother Mark and I would go out and take little tin cups and drink sap right out of the sap buckets that were hanging on the trees, you know, because that really, maple syrup and sap is the first harvest of the season, right? So winter is ending, snow's getting softer, sunlight's coming back, sap's starting to flow, and you see everybody around here in the Northeast is putting up, you know, taps and buckets. And so that, and we would boil sap on our wood stove. We learned how to tap. My dad, you know, was encouraging, grab the drill, let's tap some of our trees. And then when we got this property 5 miles from here, I started tapping trees, and the girls and Melissa and I, that was our first harvest. We grow a lot of food. We have gardens. We have a greenhouse. And the maple syrup was an added bonus. The sugar house, you know, sap's boiling, and that was kind of a fun time. The girls, I built a sled that I could tow sap and the girls through the woods, which they loved. You know, they'd come help pour buckets into a bigger container, and then we'd drag it by sled up to the sugar shack. And then, like I think I mentioned, I started brewing and started playing with fermenting and using maple sap and maple syrup. I played with a couple different products. I don't know if you know, there's a product so I had this idea 15 years ago about maple sap, calling it wild water because it's so good to drink. I had Cornell Labs test it. It's full of minerals, but it also has a lot of native wild yeast in it. It's got to be preserved in a way, right? So I was kegging it, I was basically forcing CO2 into it and didn't want to use any preservative that wasn't natural. That was almost going to be a product that I marketed, and then somebody did that. So I just was playing around a lot with it, fermenting it, using different yeast strains, using the wild yeast strains, and then took it the next step and started distilling. And then also taking like the late season syrup that is darker, a little more earthy, fermenting that and distilling it, and trying to play with yeast strains I started to find the flavor was a lot like tequila. And it even had a floral, like certain yeast produce floral fruity esters. So I was playing around with that. How can I take this spirit and make it, because I love agave spirits, tequila, mezcal, and then thinking about farm distillery, New York State, using 85% or more ingredients from New York State, but loving tequila. How can I make something that, instead of a vodka like every distillery has to do, because you need to cash flow the business while the whiskey ages, like you said. I mean, you can release a young whiskey or an unaged whiskey, but there's plenty, you know, I'm not a big fan of the moonshine label. It's not moonshine, it's a gimmick. And true moonshine, you know, I'm not a part of that history. We're at a different time. Sure. So unaged whiskey is fun, but it's not it's not as exciting to me as doing something unique like a maple distillate. You know, I started double distilling it, aging it in cooperage, like used bourbon barrels, and then also playing around with my production methods to get, you know, there's a product we make called Silverleaf. It's 100 proof spirit, clear, unaged, but it's a very small production of a very small cut of the hearts. And the yeast that I'm using produces a almost floral element and esters that I loved. And so I'm producing this very small batch, like micro small batch, because as you know, when you distill heads, hearts, tails, the hearts are the good ethyl alcohol that you collect. Usually you're gonna put it in a barrel, or that's gonna be your finished spirit. Within those hearts, the flavor will change.
Absolutely.
So most people are collecting all of those hearts, and the sum of all of those hearts is your flavor. What I'm doing with that particular maple distillate is I'm taking a small fraction of this little window of hearts, slightly later in the hearts, and that's producing this exact flavor profile that is Silverleaf, which is cool. And a lot of people think that one is even more like, you know, a Blanco tequila, and that's fun, you know. And I've got 2 other formulas that are waiting approval that are going to be pretty crazy down more the mezcal route. So I had to get formula approval for all of these because there is no category. It's spirit specialty, so it's such a new category that they don't really. I think eventually Canada is now. There's some producers I've heard are making maple distillates. I think in Vermont there are a few. So there might be a category soon, but there isn't right now.
So would you drink this neat, or would you use it
Yes.
specifically for cocktails?
I love it neat. Yeah,
Okay.
I love it neat. Especially all of the spirits we make are made to drink neat, but they make great cocktails.
Yeah.
Much like, you know, a good whiskey is a good whiskey, but let's make an old fashioned with it. You know.
What is the proof on something like this?
So Silverleaf is 100 proof, and then Seedling, and so Seedling is aged in a bourbon cask between 3 and 6 months. It's a single barrel, so it's not a blended product. Every one of these aged maple distillates is a single barrel that's proofed to 80. So there's Seedling is 3 to 6 months, slightly different production. I also pick barrels that I think are going to age longer and become old growth, which we're going to release. We don't have old growth yet. That's a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years of age. So getting into that like extra añejo category of tequila, similar idea. So we're going to release our first. We actually have a barrel that I earmarked that is, we might harvest this month. It's ready. It depends on timing, but if it sits longer, it can sit longer, you know. But it's
really cool.
really primo right now. So that'll be our first old growth release. Sapling is in between. It's about 9 to 12 months in a bourbon cask.
That's
So,
awesome.
Yeah.
So now, we also have to touch on your baby that you love. That basically you started this distillery to do.
Right.
You want to talk about it and kind of introduce it because it's a very new topic for a lot of people.
Yeah, so single malt whiskey has been, I love whiskey in general, but single malt, I would say, for whatever reason, it resonated with me, you know, at an early age, like early 20s, I found it was, it's just so exciting. The fact that the tradition, you know, going back to Scotland, Ireland, you know, the UK, and the mystique for me, there's some kind of magic in good single malt Scotch whiskey, right? So then knowing that places like Westland Distillery in America, there's a new category. I'm part of, we're American single malt producers. So trying to build, much like there are laws governing bourbon whiskey and, you know, 51% corn, new charred white oak barrels, etc. American single malt is trying to follow strict guidelines, much like Scotch, single malt Scotch whiskey. So very simple barley yeast water. I look at it a lot like a single vintage wine, you know, that's made from one grape variety. So a varietal wine. This year, these grapes pulled all this minerality. The sun was right. The harvest was perfect. There was low stress on, you know, pests and mold, mildew. It's the same with single malt whiskey, I believe. So what's fun is to work with farmers and really try to, because growing malting barley in New York City is very difficult.
Sure.
And I feel lucky I'm working with some amazing farmers, some very local, some a little bit further out, about like an hour and a half away. And we're all working with, so Hartwick College does all the testing, and there's a conference, Cornell is part of it, Cornell University, and New York State is really trying to figure out how can we grow good malting barley, because the brewers, there's a huge demand obviously with breweries, and now with bourbon, any whiskey, rye whiskey, bourbon, you don't have to use malt, but traditionally malt was what you use to use those enzymes to convert all the starch to sugar to then ferment, right? So malt is always, if you look at any Kentucky bourbon, they're going to have malting barley, So we're seeing that New York State isn't quite meeting, I think, the demand that's coming. So that's been exciting anyway. It's one other aspect, and it's fun to work at the grassroots level, growing what will then be made into whiskey here in the distillery. And I don't know, there's something so elemental and simple, a lot like the maple distillates. It's very clean, very simple. It's from the ground, it's sunlight, it's stored in barley, it's stored in the maple syrup and sap, and then you're converting all that sugar into alcohol, and then it too is kind of this special, magical thing that you save. And a lot of times winter, for whatever reason, it's cold, we have a fire in the wood stove, you want something that warms you, and that sunlight is then cracked open from the bottle again. And it's kind of magical for me to see, to know the farmers, know the fields, go visit the barley as it's growing, to then bring it in as kind of like an honor, like how can I take this effort that you did and all your work that you're proud of, and then I take it and I make something that's then passed on and taken home with other people. And that's kind of why raising spirits in the Finger Lakes became kind of our motto and our mantra, because we're trying to elevate the discussion but also raise people up, uplifting, make it inspired, Sure.
So when you're comparing it to like a bourbon or a basic whiskey, is the difference within the distillation process, or is the difference within the growing process?
So a little bit of both, and then a whole nother mash bill. So every whiskey has its own governing laws, let's say. Some of them are looser than others, but single malt whiskey, American single malt whiskey, barley, yeast, water, right? 100%. Nothing. That's the mash bill. All barley malt. Bourbon has to be 51% corn or more by law in the mash bill. All the other elements you can play around with. So you can do 51% corn, you can do 30% malt, and the rest can be rye, or rye and wheat, a 4-grain, or it can be a high rye. So you can go high rye, and the rest of your mash bill can be 100% corn, as long as it's 51% corn or more. So bourbon is kind of all over the map in terms of what the mash bill can be, where single malt barley, or American single malt is 100% barley. And so that's a big factor. So it's all barley flavor. And so yes, there's different distillation. Definitely my cuts on the still, the way I do my first run, the way I'm run in, your tails, there's a lot of flavor in tails. There's also things that, I don't want to geek out too much, but obviously you've got many different alcohols, many different compounds, fusel oils, all these things that'll come off on a still, and you can use those as an artist to your advantage. Your stripping run kind of is going to determine what your palate is in your final distillation run when you make those tight cuts to your heart. And so it's kind of like, you have to plan ahead. You have to say, what do I want my bourbon? What do I want to come forward in that bourbon? And bourbon, I feel like, is much oilier. It's got a different mouthfeel than Scotch whiskey or single malt whiskey does. And part of that, I think, is that corn element. It's got, and also the barrel is charred, where single malt whiskey is usually going into a used barrel, because it's like a tea bag. You take something delicate like barley, yeast, and water. It doesn't have all that big oil and bold flavor like maybe rye, the spice of rye with the oily corn, that's going to hold up to something that's charred. It needs. I've had single malt whiskey in a charred oak barrel, and it's not good. because it just overpowers it.
Sure.
So when you take a bourbon cask, freshly dumped, it's charred, yes, but it's been used like a tea bag. Still has some flavor in it, but it's now softer. And because single malt is typically aged longer, you really have the ability to age it long, and it doesn't change so drastically like a bourbon might. You might change in a month. You go back and taste that barrel and it's totally different. Where single malt, I feel like, is a slower, more delicate, softer aging. And then you can put it in another cask to finish it, whether that's sherry or X wine, Pinot Noir, whatever, some fun options. Rum.
Don't get me started on rum.
Yeah.
So, have you had any experimental single malts yourself, just like off the record, trying to figure out like how this would even go? How do those work out?
You mean, have I done them or have I tried others?
No, you.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So your first attempt, was it like, well, I got some work to do? Or?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
Okay.
No. Yeah, definitely. And part of it too is it's a little tricky with single malt. You were talking about production, and I forgot to. So with single malt whiskey, you're taking the liquid. When you mash in, it's actually called lautering. It's like a brewery would do. False bottom on your cooker. So a false bottom is like a strainer. I showed you guys the mash tun. All that liquid is called wort, and that liquid you drain through the barley, and that is what you ferment. Bourbon is all grain in. So it's all the corn, it's all ground up, it's mashed in, it's then fermented all with the grain. So that is a little tricky with single malt because when you lauter that barley, you want the hulls that you use a roller mill with barley, right? Because you want it to crush the hull of the barley. You don't want it to grind it into powder. If you're making bourbon, it's okay to grind it into a powder because you're not using it as a filter bed. You just want all those enzymes ground up. So it's not as tender a process as lautering barley. So you want to crush that hull to open the starch up, but you want the shell of the barley to also act as a filter that all that wort drains through. And if your temperatures aren't right, your strike temp isn't right, your enzymes, you can ruin things in a hurry. You're trying to basically get those enzymes, find the temperature that's going to work for both your main enzymes, beta and alpha, enzymes, to break all that starch down and make it into sugar. So you can get some off flavors if your water temp is big. The way you're draining your wort, brewers will tell you it's very finicky. You want to take your time, low and slow, and you really don't want to be mixing that grain bed up a whole lot when you start draining your wort. So yeah, those first attempts where something wasn't, I just kept playing, or you're not cooling your wort fast enough. You're not sanitizing is a huge thing for everyone making beverage alcohol. So yeah, I made some funky, and I also got some bad grain. There's a lot of, like, fusarium is a bacterial, and grain, just like grapes, can mold, can pre-sprout. You can have some bad grain. Corn can be all over the map. I've had really bad corn, and that flavor comes. You can't take something that tastes awful and make something good by, I don't care who you talk to. So you really have to start with high quality grain or fruit, and you have to be very careful about the process. Otherwise it can go off the rails in a hurry. It's not just like throw it all together and hey, run it through the still and it tastes great,
Sure.
And
So talking about Scotch too, and how it relates. So everybody that associates Scotch, they think of peat moss and that heavy peated flavor.
Yep.
Does American single malt have that in there? And if so, where does it come from? Because I'm assuming you're not burning peat to dry it out. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, you are. Okay.
You are. So Ireland, Scotland, that area, they don't have a whole lot of wood. So they burn peat. They're bogs. It's highly compressed. Basically, it's a young coal. So they also would fire stills with coal. Early Scottish, I actually have some old blended Scotch that I picked up, almost a mineral coal note, and I did research, and that distillery was actually burning coal. And I believe Caolila also, or Bunnahabhain, one of them, they were coal-fired stills. So that peat that's there is just not quite coal. It's pitched out onto the ground with a shovel. It's made into almost like a log brick. Let the sun dry it, and now that's what they use to cook with. That's what, when they harvest the barley, you need to trick the barley into germinating. That's how you get the enzymes. So, and then you stop that barley from sprout. It's called chitting. It'll grow a little rootlet, and when that rootlet gets to a certain length where you know, okay, now it's those enzymes are there because it's going to convert that seed starch into sugar for the new plant. You dry that barley, and you do that with, here a lot of times maltsters will use gas or electric dryers, but really I think gas is pretty common. In Scotland, in Ireland, it was peat. So the peat, the way they do it is they'd lay all that barley that's still moist because it's sprouted, and they would lay it out on a screen and build a fire, crude way really, underneath it. But now they have a little more elaborate system with forced air, and that peat smoke would rise up through the barley, because that barley can be, in some cases, 2 to 3 feet thick.
Sure.
And that smoke is actually now infused in that barley, because you're literally just burning for hours. I think in Scotland, like heavily peated is 18 hours plus of heavily burning that peat to dry it, and then they might fire up a gas forced air draft to dry it the rest of the way.
That's the stuff he doesn't like.
Well, Octomore is, I think, the most heavily peated in Bruichladdich. Octomore is the highest ppm, and that is some ridiculous, like 48 or 50 hour burn of peat. It's insane.
That's like putting a smoker into your mouth.
Yes.
And then someone jumps on it.
Totally.
Come on.
Yeah.
So how long? Yeah. So you're going to be doing that for yours?
I am. Yeah. So I'm working with Murmuration Malt. Judd and Emily Hallett, their family owns malt. They're maltsters. It's a malt house up in Bloomfield, and yeah, Judd. I started brainstorming with Judd I think even before I was building this place, because I saw him building his, building, and I thought, is this going to be a malt house? Is it going to be a brewery? So I was super excited to meet him, and he's got great ideas. He and Emily and his kids all work in that business, and he let me build a smoker, and I brought in peat from Scotland, from Islay, and then I also have been doing some cherry wood, some other woods, white oak from my property here in New York State. So it's kind of a hybrid.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but and then I'm also working with another maltster who he owned Pioneer Malt, and he's doing a heavily peated. That's what I'm actually producing right now, is a heavily peated, all from Scotland. So it's a heavily peated malt, and distilleries like Westland have a heavily peated. They may bring in their malt from Scotland actually, because they're not a farm distillery like I am, a Class D license. So I believe they might be bringing it in. It's getting essentially the same peated malt that a lot of those distilleries are bringing in.
Now, do you like the peated flavor?
I do.
And do you like it because you actually like it? Like I like it because I like the way chocolate tastes? Or do you like it because you understand the art behind it and the process? Like, does that kind of...
I loved it before I knew the process. I loved the flavor. Yeah.
Cheers to you, man.
Yeah. I mean, I will say I have had some that it's over the top. Sure. I mean, I love them all. I even like Octomore, but, it's mood, right? Like if you're, you go to a dram that you might want a sherry sweet Speyside that has no peat, because you're in that mood, or you're having food and it's kind of more of a dessert dram. But then you also might be you might be barbecuing, might be smoking a cigar, and you want to match it kind of like with like, so that smoke can hold up to the cigar or the barbecue or whatever you're doing. I feel like, depending on my mood, I love bring on the smoke.
Yeah. You like Glenlivet 15, right?
Yeah.
So for our 50th episode, we've been telling our listeners this. We're having Lagavulin 16.
Nice.
And he doesn't like the peat, so he's forcing me to make him steak. That way he can enjoy it properly.
There you go.
I told him the steak is probably going to be wrapped in bacon, so that we ensure there's enough meat.
Totally.
Yeah.
So being such a new process, the American single malt, what have your influences been? Because you can't really reach out to distilleries to ask how they're doing it, because most distilleries aren't doing this.
Right.
So how are you getting all this knowledge?
traveling, looking, I've been to every distillery on Isla. I've been to, when you go in, you're all eyes.
Sure.
So, and also you meet people that share a lot of knowledge, doing every aspect of production at Springbank, from literally we floor malted barley, pitched it out of the steep, wheelbarrowed it, fired the peat up, pitched, so we're doing everything from milling to malting. And then when you're around those people, to them it's like anything, like, pouring a glass of water. It's a process.
Sure.
You turn the tap on, you fill your glass, you drink it. And so they're very generous. There's no, there is mystique and there is excitement and mystery, and some things might be kind of left out, but if you read between the lines and you're observant and you pay attention and you're let into, you kind of allowed behind the curtains. Sure. In a lot of these places, and you pick the right people's brains. Mm-hmm. And you find generous people, they share, and that's part of the fun. Is I'm never going to make the same whiskey that you would, or that any distillery in Scotland's going to make, nor would I want to.
Right.
I'm really trying to make a very local, you were using local barley, like right now, Naples grown barley from the Rathbun farm and the Fay farm up the road, and I'm using New York State white oak barrels, and I'm using, some of actually Black Button's use bourbon casks.
Nice.
All of their ingredients are coming from New York State farms. Mm-hmm. So that also lends to the story. You saw the dunnage warehouse under the deck. We're going to be getting a lot of the Naples air and the cool air that drops off the hill and the warm eastern, sunlight early morning. We're going to get all of these things that are blooming, that are happening outside, are going to influence that whiskey, much like the sea influences Scottish whiskey, because all those dunnage warehouses right by the ocean are very porous, and that salt air is getting in there, and you have that, like I think of Old Pulteney has like a maritime sea note. Yeah. So we're gonna be finding out what Naples tastes like here in a couple of years. Yeah.
That's so interesting.
That's amazing.
First of all, can you explain to people what you mean by your dunnage warehouse, and then also, like, kind of off of that, why aren't more distilleries doing this, where you have the barrel sit outside and kind
I don't know.
Honestly, it might just be because of demand, where they have flagship products, where the demand is so high for those flagship products. They're kind of holstered to that, where they really don't necessarily have the amount of resources that you have down the street, literally,
right,
or the time
and
to really dive into it too, because to his point, there's not a lot of local distilleries that have gone to countless workshops for like the last 15 years all over the world to then come back and then utilize the land that you have to then make a product that you want based off of prior experiences. So I think that has a lot to do with it too,
And there aren't a lot of single malt whiskey, American single malt whiskey producers. There are some out there, and it's growing. But I think that's part of why, most people, bourbon, so Scotch whiskey had a boom, and literally right on its heels, bourbon. And bourbon far surpassed, as you probably well know, the demand. And right now, bottles that we would all enjoy 15 years ago, that you could buy the local store, name anything from Van Winkle, Weller, those were like everyday drinkers that were $20 to $30. Bourbon has just been, far exceeded the demand that happened with Scotch single malt whiskey. And now I think you're seeing people come back, people that maybe even discovered bourbon, that's their gateway into whiskey drinking, right? Yep. Now are saying, there's other whiskeys. There's rye whiskey. There's Empire rye whiskey, which is a super exciting category in New York State, and now there's American single malt whiskey. They may have discovered bourbon, and most distilleries in this country were making bourbon, right? I think I don't know how many now. The number is growing for American single malt, but it's not anywhere near what the bourbon output is. It's a fraction. So I think that's part of it. Dunnage warehousing in Scotland is the most basic. It can be brick, can be concrete. Most often, though, it's some kind of masonry. It's rock, stone, and the floors are dirt. And part of that is it was cheap. You just need a place that, you could store your barrels safely for the revenuers, because those barrels are taxes owed on those barrels until you take them out of bond. So the government is they want a warehouse that's secure, caged in with steel, and but basic. They didn't want to make their dunnage warehouses pretty. Kentucky rick barns are a whole different thing, but the same idea, basically like tin. Sure. Wood ricks and then tin. Now they're getting a little more elaborate. Buffalo Trace has done tremendous amount of research on and development on how they're building their new rick houses. They're foaming insulation in. It's a little more involved, climate control, windows that open and draft a certain way. They've studied it by using digital sensors. Scotland, they're still traditional. There's not a single dunnage warehouse there and literally at Springbank, the barrels are rotting into the ground, There's mushrooms growing. So cool. And it influences that in an amazing way.
Absolutely.
Could you imagine their ideology? They're like, it's windy today. That'll taste good in 6 years. Like, they don't care.
30 years.
Yeah.
This one is going to be good. And they do have traditional, like, concrete floor, almost more like a rick house. I've seen that even at Springbank. But the magic, I feel, happens in those dunnage warehouses where so much of the outside air is influenced, your outside environment and the ground earth is influencing the taste of the flavor of the whiskey. So when we built this place, obviously budget's tight. We have this wonderful deck and space underneath it that I'm welding the concrete. It's concrete and steel. I'm making kind of a vault, a dunnage warehouse. The first open air dunnage warehouse that I know of, which is exciting.
That is sweet.
Because, that I think is going to influence it even that much more, because like we said, the sunlight hitting the barrels in the winter, we're going to get some of that whiskey moving into the wood, and then it gets really cold when the clouds come over. It can drop 20 to 30 degrees. So it's really the movement of that whiskey in and out of the wood that's chemically changing it and also helping, with the maturation.
Now, in all the time that you've spent in Scotland, do you think that there's a year where you just kind of don't surpass keeping something in a barrel, where it'll kind of just taste too woody in a sense?
Yeah,
because
for sure.
there's certain bottles that are for sale that are just an ungodly amount of money.
Oh yeah.
But they're like 75 years old and everyone's flipping out about it, and then they drink it and it tastes like
terrible.
Yeah, it's just straight garbage for
$40,000. Like oak, yeah. It's like
yes.
Drinking an oak tree.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it's funny because, I'll even admit to this, getting into whiskey in my 20s and, just kind of doing it from a strictly love, flavor, taste. Ooh, this tastes good. I'm going to buy that again. Or, oh, I like that. Somebody recommended this. Not really and then, then the realization of, oh, this is a, 15-year-old. It's a little more money, or saving money to buy, a 21-year Portwood Belveni, or something like that, where I was like, all right, I'm saving, I'm going to drop, $150 on a bottle, which was huge. And the number 21 years, that became a thing for a lot of people, even myself included, where you're paying for that. And you should, because to think about $150 for a bottle that's been sitting in a beautiful oak barrel for 21 years, cared for, and is amazing, is 21 years. Like, I remember drinking something on numerous occasions that was older than I am.
Right.
That's a pretty amazing mystical thing. Somebody had the care and foresight. They may not even be alive. They made that, the barley grew, it was laid in a barrel, and now I was born somewhere after that, and here I am partaking in it. It's pretty amazing. So I get both sides of it, but I agree there is a magic time. I used to be kind of a snob about younger whiskeys, even about craft whiskey. When American craft whiskey first became a thing, some of them just were awful in my mind, and probably and that's my opinion. Sure. I'm not saying they are, and I'm not going to name any names, but now I'm way more open now, and I also feel like the industry has grown and matured, and we're getting better, and we're making better product, and we're now competing on a global level, and the demand has gone up. And what's cool about small batch things there's a magic to consistency, but there's also a magic to, this is kind of a one-off.
Sure.
I think of a distillery like Corsair. Sometimes they're doing so many crazy wild experiments that, hey, good luck getting that bottle ever again, because they're never going to make that spirit again. And they were doing some crazy fun things with smoking with mesquite and using quinoa to make whiskey, and just wild stuff, which is so exciting. And the craft industry allowed that to happen, and the demand, and people like all of us that are like, I want to try this. I want to try a maple distillate. I want to try a quinoa whiskey. So I don't think the age, I do agree there's a time. That's where like a master blender, somebody that's job is to watch those barrels, mark them, take really good notes, say, watch that barrel because I think she's ready, mark it, let's harvest it, because any more and it's done. Or, hey, that one went too far in a bourbon, it's too oaky, let's blend it off into this other with some younger barrels to kind of help boost that oak tannin. So there's an art to, there's an art to distillation, and there's a crazy amount of art to maturation. And I've taken workshops. Nancy Fraley, for example, and Hubert. Nancy Fraley is an amazing blender, and learning. I could probably study with her for years and never get to the bottom of, like, she's blending for Wyoming whiskey and for Joseph Magnus whiskey, and they'll hire her to come in, and I admire that. I probably, if I can afford to, would love to have her come at some point, and because you get too close to your artwork and you're not, I may think I know that it's good, but it's also mine. It's kind of like, my kids are the best kids,
Yeah.
Well, my kids are the best kids. So same with whiskey, making anything you think you get excited. Sometimes you're not excited and you're like, scrap it. It's not good. But it's great to have somebody else whose job it is, like a master blender, come in and say, nope, you need to do this, or hey, that's really maturing nicely. Let's watch that barrel. Let's do this. Let's do that.
Sure. So when are you estimating your first bottle to be sold of your American single malt?
I'm kind of leaning toward, I've got 2 barrels down there of the peated and smoked, all organically grown. It's not certified organic, but it's from the Fay farm. It was the first farm I worked with. So it's kind of, I've been excited to release even a young single malt. It's not going to be, a 16-year Lagavulin.
Right.
It's just not. It can't have that complexity. But there's something exciting about it. It's young. I may release it cask strength, because right now the samples are really tasty.
Sure.
And it's exciting. It's fun. So it might be as soon as this winter. Ooh. I mean, part of me wants to release it this fall, just young, to get people trying it, because it is going to be, Naples' first whiskey and our first smoked and peated, all Naples grown whiskey, which is kind of fun. And I think it'll actually be, I've sampled some friends who are single malt drinkers on it, and they're like, it's amazing. We tried it against like St. George. Milk and Honey out of Israel is making a single malt, a young single malt. So a lot of these younger single malts, I kind of did a little bit of a tasting with a couple friends. I've gotten some input, and just to see, what do you think, and they picked ours as the best of the group, which is cool, in a blind, and also at cask strength, which that's also fun, bump up the excitement a little bit. It's young, it's feisty.
What's the proof on it? Right
now, I think I enter the barrels a little lower. I think it's like at 110, 115. Okay. Nice. Not crazy. Not like, some in Scotland, 63.5 is kind of the magic number. They enter 63.5% ABV, which is high. But I think part of that is it's aging longer, and they drop proof, because in Scotland, in dunnage warehouses, you're losing, your alcohol is evaporating, whereas in Kentucky, your water is evaporating, because the dunnage warehouses stay cool, right? Scotland is a cool climate, much like New York. So I anticipate we're going to play around here, but I think we might balance out losing alcohol and water in the barrel, because we are a little bit open air and getting sunlight, and it's a little warmer than Scotland. Dunnage warehouses are cold in the winter, so that whiskey isn't doing a whole lot, and they're losing their, ethyl alcohol is evaporating. In Kentucky, dark, the barrel rick houses heat up because they're just metal. They're open, very little insulation, and they're just cooking. And they want that whiskey to go into the wood, be like extreme in and out, in and out, in and out. Sure. So they're losing water in Kentucky. and the proof is going up in the barrel. And in Scotland, it's the opposite. They're losing alcohol, and the proof is going down.
So interesting how climate plays into it.
Yeah, totally.
So one more thing that I want to talk about before we wrap this up, because I think it's been over an hour already. So
Yeah, sorry.
appreciate your time.
Yeah.
No, it's awesome information, and something that our viewers will definitely appreciate, because the American single malt is such a new thing, and it's going to be awesome. We're excited for your stuff to come out.
Thank you.
Just to kind of bring it back again, though, I want to talk about the restaurant area
Yeah.
of this, just to bring people here
Yep.
for a different reason other than whiskey
Yeah.
and your distilled products. Do you want to talk about your farm-to-table process, and then also, you're probably one of the first distilleries that has an insane collection of different whiskeys in the back, and you're not just trying to sell your own stuff.
Right.
So can you please talk about that a little bit too?
So this goes back to, again, my wife Melissa and I love food, love pairing food, wine, spirits, beer, cider, whatever. Fun, just food is celebration, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with starting a local farm-to-table restaurant prior to this, we learned a lot. We love working with local farmers. A lot of our friends are local farmers, and we like supporting that. And we feel like we're lucky in the Finger Lakes to be living in kind of the land of plenty, right? So in building this, we wanted a small kitchen that's putting out amazing Finger Lakes food, Finger Lakes bounty. We do have some seafood. I love seafood, so we pull in occasionally we're doing a crab cake right now that's off the charts good. Occasionally we'll bring some shrimp. We try to source everything very sustainably. But for the most part, it's all Finger Lakes grown, super local, and my wife Melissa is she's kind of overseeing the process. We just hired 2 young guns, Phil and Andrew you can check out their Instagram is 11 Weld. They've been cooking. They're young guys, super passionate, great technique, great skills. So we're excited. They're doing a lot of our specials, so that's been fun. So I think part of it, the process now is to see that creativity in the kitchen, get people excited to come back every week for something new. Mm-hmm. And also just talking to you love cider one night, beer one night, maybe wine, maybe a good single malt, maybe a bourbon. Mm-hmm. We want people to come here, and that's why we got the on-premise, get anything they want. I don't have any delusions about, I don't want people to feel limited. They might not like our spirits. I hope they do. I'd love to think our spirits are great, but I'm not going to delude myself, and I'm not going to try to force people. I want people to come here and have exactly what they need at that moment. So we hunt some amazing whiskey. I try to curate a really good wine selection. What do we do well in the Finger Lakes? Let's feature that. Rieslings. We're doing some really good Gruners. We're doing some good Merlot. Some of the reds are not quite there. So we have California cabs. They're a Washington or Oregon Pinot Noir. So we're kind of just trying to make this something for everyone, and we really want people to come here, be inspired, and have exactly what they need at that moment, because that's kind of going out is a treat, right? It's a little vacation, and I feel like that's what you want people to walk away from here feeling recharged, inspired, totally satisfied. That's the hope.
I think you're doing a damn good job.
Thank you, man.
Absolutely.
You have to come back for some food.
Oh yeah.
Well, yeah, it's not.
Absolutely.
Listen, don't
Soon.
worry. Yeah, we'll be back.
do it.
So for flagship products, what are your flagship products? Where can people buy them?
Yeah.
And then what are your hours here, so that way people can swing by.
So we started on an online store, Hollerhorn.com. You can click on the online store and actually get everything, including right now the SLA has granted us privileges to sell. We're selling Weller as well. We've sold, we can sell anything, but we also, our on-premise is always allowed wine, beer, and cider to be sold to go. So on that store, our flagships are right now our maple distillates. So Silverleaf, the 100 proof, clear, unaged spirit. Seedling is about 6 to 9 months aged in bourbon. Maple distillate, double distilled, 80 proof. Sapling, I'd say those 3. Sapling is the oldest of the maple distillates, 80 proof as well. Those 3, and then we're doing a gin we call Gin Ship. It's a collaboration with Black Button, actually, and we're on batch 2, version 2. We're going to do version 3, I think, this fall, and that's been a fun way to collaborate with them. I feel like they're making some really fun, great gins too. And then we have an apple brandy called South Holler. Another I love collaborations. You can kind of see that's kind of the spirit of the place. Steve Seelan at South Hill Cider and Phonograph is his other label, making, I think, some of the best New York State cider.
Okay.
A lot of heirloom New York State apples. He's working on a beautiful orchard. His ciders are amazing. So we collaborated and made an apple brandy aged in a used bourbon and seedling maple distillate cask. And now I'm working on round 2 of that. So that's going to be an ongoing flagship product.
Sure.
Kind of like a Calvados apple brandy. And then I've got strawberry brandy, unaged brandy coming out soon. That's done. Cherry that I was working on today. So we're also calling them, like Kirsch is the Austrian, is German for cherry. They call Kirschwasser is basically cherry water, right? And that's like a schnapps, which is just fruit yeast water. And that's what we're doing, unaged brandy.
Sweet.
So we're going to do we're going to follow the fruit in the Finger Lakes. So I've got plums already started. I've got strawberries. We'll do a Marilyn, an apricot schnapps or unaged brandy.
Wow.
We're going to try to build on the brandy and get people excited about fruit. Again, kind of stored sunlight in a bottle.
Sure.
So those are the flagships. And then the single malt, we're releasing our first, it's going to be a young whiskey that's made from Bloody Butcher corn, and I'll show you. It's an heirloom red open pollinated corn. So that's coming out soon, and I'm using a whole different process. We can go into that. It's unlike any other corn whiskey, and we'll save it for the next visit. But yeah so that's going to be released this fall.
Okay.
And that's aged in Finger Lakes wine casks, so it'll be kind of fun.
That's awesome.
So kind of
You're doing so much.
Yeah.
So what about hours again?
Hours are right now Friday through Sunday. Friday and Saturday from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. Sunday from 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. And we are going to add, we always were open Thursday, but we're just taking a break. We're going to do some pairing dinners to try to recharge this winter, and then in spring, full Thursday through Sunday hours again. But you can place an order online, come pick it up, curbside. I'm here just about any day, so if you leave a message when you purchase spirits, just say, if possible, call me, and I'll pick it up, which we do all the time. We have people traveling through the Finger Lakes, and they place an order, and then they'll just leave. You have the ability to leave a message when you buy online. Just give me a number, and I'm here every day. So I'll meet you outside.
Yeah. What about social media? Are you on social media?
On social media, yep. Super simple. We're on Facebook, Instagram. You'll find us at Hollerhorn. We are the only Hollerhorn, so just look up Hollerhorn Distilling on all those. We not really on Twitter a whole lot, but yeah, Instagram, Facebook. Our website is a great spot too. All of our posts and photos from social media upload automatically to the website, so you can kind of follow what's happening with photographs. It's kind of fun.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your
Thank
time.
you, guys.
Everybody, come down to the Finger Lakes area. Check out Hollerhorn Distilling. They have an awesome venue, some sweet hangout spot. They bands sometimes too.
Oh yeah.
That come
a lot
and play
of live
here.
music. Yep.
Yeah. So this is just an awesome area to bring anyone and just have a good time and enjoy a drink. So
Thank you,
so
guys.
much,
Thanks
Carl.
so much,
Appreciate
bro.
it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Take care, everybody.
See you soon.